How you doing, everybody? Thanks for joining us. My name is Jim Birkhead with True Transport Insure. I'm here with Tom Kane, who's the National Sales Director for our team, and welcome you in to talk about some non-trucking liability. A few housekeeping items before we get into the actual presentation. One, we really value everyone's time. We're going to keep this 30 minutes or under, so this will move quick. Two, you will get a copy of the presentation afterwards, so if there's any questions or anything, obviously you can go back and have that information to check. And then three, there will be some time for questions at the end of this. We'll have a few minutes to answer questions, so you should see a panel to submit them. So without further ado, we'll move into the agenda. Genesis of this conversation starts just with our day-to-day, and that we focus on what we call owner-operator lines of coverage, non-trucking liability, occupational accident, physical damage. And we get a lot of questions. We have a lot of conversations day in, day out about what is non-trucking liability. A lot of people may see it here or there. They may not be overly familiar with what it is, how it functions as a coverage. And so we thought it'd be beneficial to the agency base that we work with, just to kind of get it out there and really break it down and get a little more technical on what the coverage is, what it's supposed to provide, and how it functions in the marketplace. Tom, anything you want to throw in on that?
No, it's a great way of putting it, Jim.
All right, awesome, thank you. So, and then another thing I think that is important too is, anytime you're in a presentation or you're having a, conversation with somebody, who are they, where are they coming from, what is their background, why are they sitting here talking to me? So just a little bit more, if we move on to the next slide, just a little bit more about who we are, what we focus on, what we do. So as I mentioned, a second ago, we focus on these owner-operator lines of coverage: occupational accident, non-trucking liability, physical damage. We've been doing that for about 20 years. We don't try to be everything to everybody. We develop a niche, we stay in that niche, we learn it well. We have the carriers, the volume. We're seeing the same things day in and day out. So something like non-trucking liability is something that we are literally writing every day. We have a large book of it, and so we are able to, hopefully provide value to you and your insureds, and help you navigate something that you may not be seeing every day. We're also, we're writing package for moving storage, right? We're looking at some freight brokers and some physical damage cargo for company-owned physical damage. For company-owned motor carriers. But day in, day out, our bread and butter are these owner-operator lines of coverage. As I said, we don't try to be all things to all people. We do not write primary auto liability. This is what we do. If we keep moving through, just a little bit more about us, and then getting on to NSM. We are an NSM company. NSM is approaching $2 billion in written premium, one of the largest program managers in the world at this point. And NSM operates under a philosophy similar to what I was just mentioning with True Transport, in that, get deep into a vertical and really master that vertical. And that's why we have about 20 different programs, everything from coastal condos to addiction treatment to towing to collector car, that we, really specialize in. I think specialty is a word we use a lot, and niche is a word we use a lot, to know those niches ins and outs, so we can be, again, of service to the end user. So, just some more stats on NSM, but that's who we are as a company, headquartered out of Philadelphia. And move on to the next. Cool. And that's just a snapshot of some of our programs. Some of you, if you're transportation focused, you may be familiar with KBK. You may do some transportation workers comp with all comp, or if you're a generalist, you may be familiar with some of our other programs, but that's just a quick snapshot of the programs that fall under the NSM umbrella. A lot of people know us by our brand name. They know us as True Transport Insure, but that is, NSM is the umbrella that we all roll up into. So without further ado, let's get on to non-trucking liability and get down in the weeds a little bit further about what it is and what it provides for the drivers. So when we mention owner operators, I think it's critical. We'll define a little further in the next slide, but we just kind of reference who owner operators are and how they function in the transportation sector. So there's about 400,000. You see numbers vary. 350, 400,000 owner operators in the country, comprising about 10% of the truck drivers in the country. So it's something that you may run in, even if you're focusing on trucking, you probably will run into owner operators, but it may not be, some of the lines of coverage may not be things that you're writing day in and day out. And so that's where, when we mentioned being an afterthought, oh yeah, I gotta get an OCAC. I have to get non-trucking liability, but you may not, because you're not seeing it every day, may not be something that you're really diving into. Hey, let's place the coverage and move on to the next. We have those conversations a lot. But obviously with anything that isn't, the focus, that isn't at the forefront, some issues can arise, right? If I'm writing trucking every day and I go and I try to write, my buddy's restaurant down the street, I may miss something. I may have an issue because I missed an angle or I didn't write it correctly. And that's where we see problems come in. And obviously I think some plaintiffs' attorneys, that they understand that there are some gaps here. They understand there's some issues here. And obviously like they do, they are going to look for ways that they can, they can manage that. So owner operators are independent contractor drivers that are leased onto motor carriers that have DOT authority. So it's an independent contractor who's really a business owner who's really, running his own day-to-day as he or she sees fit. And again, it's comprised about 10% of the overall driving workforce. If we move on to the next, again, just to kind of further define what an owner operator is, they're paid by 1099, not W-2. They should own their own tractor. They should own their own, unit that they're driving. They should be paying their own expenses, determining what loads they drive, what loads they don't drive. They're not really under the direction or control of the motor carrier they're driving for, right? So they own their unit. They are leasing on to a motor carrier that has that DOT authority and the primary auto liability insurance, but they are operating as a business owner working for that, for that motor carrier. That is as opposed to a W-2 employee driver who can be told to wear a uniform, undergo this training. You will be here at 9 o'clock on Wednesday to pick up this load and drive it here. They have less control over their schedule. They obviously, they have more of a fixed pay. They have some other benefits that the owner operator, the independent contractor driver doesn't have, but just two different models. The owner operator provides more flexibility into the trucking industry, into the logistics industry. It's a great tool that obviously, many motor carriers and many drivers have chosen to embrace. And one other thing to add on that, it varies by state. You may be an independent contractor in Missouri. That same setup may not be an independent contractor in California, and that's something as we look at these coverages and as we navigate them, we need to make sure that we're understanding is the regulatory environment varies by state. So that is just a quick summation of when we reference an owner-operator driver, when we're talking about non-trucking liability, what it is. It's an independent contractor. So moving on to the next slide. And then let's talk about when we mention non-trucking liability, what is that? Non-trucking liability is obviously a liability coverage. There we go. NTL 101. So we hear bobtail thrown around a lot. We specifically use the word non-trucking liability because that is by and large what we're writing day in and day out. And it's liability coverage for bodily injury or property damage resulting from accidents where the driver or truck is not under dispatch and is on personal time. Okay. So what does that mean? Business use is excluded. So if that driver has a load, or if that driver, is on their way to pick up a load, or anything else that could be defined as under business use, that incident, that claim is not going to be covered under non-trucking liability. So it is a coverage designed for when the driver is truly on their personal time, wholly completely on their personal time. We have some coverage items we'll go through later, some claims examples where we can kind of get in some of the gray areas and hash that out exactly what that means. Business use, because like anything, devil's in the details, business use versus personal time, but that is the generic, that is the easy definition, is non-trucking liability. If it's covered for that driver who owns his unit because he's going to take his unit home, when he's not working and he happens to use that unit. Most policies that we run into have $1 million NTL limit. We do see some $500,000 limits in the marketplace, and some lower limits are available. Obviously, we always recommend, because of the nature of the claims that you see come in, we recommend that $1 million limit. And one other item to note on this, coverage is attached to the truck, not the driver. We have this conversation relatively frequently. And these policies are going to be reported and or scheduled where, that 2022 Freightliner with the VIN number is going to be specifically listed under that policy. That NTL coverage is for that Freightliner. It's not attached to the driver necessarily, where that driver can then go jump in a pickup truck, jump in a box truck that's part of the fleet, something to that effect, drive it, and have NTL respond to that coverage. So NTL is going to follow those units that are scheduled and are reported under that policy. Move on to the next slide. Just some additional items to know about non-trucking liability. This is kind of just to provide some context. This is just a little bit of everything here. But, I think if you are having conversations with your insureds about NTL, you may hear it's very narrow coverage. I don't need it. It's not important. It's what we see across our book. We see low frequency, high severity. And so, we don't see, necessarily a quote unquote ton of claims paid out. But when you see claims paid out, they tend to be pretty high. We do see limit losses, those $1 million limit losses, because again, we're talking about a liability coverage versus maybe a physical damage coverage or some of these other. So that is something that I think obviously to be aware of and talking to your insured. In the event that you do have a claim that is covered, it is going to be pretty, an NTL claim that doesn't fall under primary auto liability, you could have a pretty significant issue on your hands. For a driver unit to be eligible for non-trucking liability, they must be leased on a motor carrier that has DOT authority. As part of that DOT authority, and this is one of the linchpins of this NTL coverage, as part of that DOT authority, that motor carrier is going to have primary auto liability coverage. Okay, so that primary auto liability covers that driver in that unit when they are engaging in that business use, when they are hauling freight, when they are on their way to get the truck fixed, something to that effect. Okay. So as part of the underwriting process, we are going to ask for that lease agreement to ensure that that mechanism is in place, that driver or that fleet, is leased onto a DOT approved motor carrier DOT authority. One other note, in that if you have a company that, one individual, they own one company that has a DOT authority, and they own another, say, unit or smaller fleet, that they cannot then lease on one of their fleets under another fleet's authority, because at the end of the day, you have one person that owns two different fleets, one driving under the other. That NTL for the fleet that's leasing on would end up being primary auto liability. So again, we'll get into this a little further, but that is really the linchpin of this coverage, is that to get NTL, you're going to need to be leased onto somebody that has the primary auto liability under whose insurance you are covered while you're driving, hauling for them. So we see a lot of this is invoiced monthly by reported. So a lot of these fleet policies will be monthly reported. The smaller policies, one or two drivers, they tend to be more of an annual policy. We frequently see installments on them. So, I'd say 90+% of the policies that we write for this, payment is coming in, it's reported payment is coming in on a monthly basis. So again, just something to be aware of. Obviously, as with primary auto liability, UIM, under uninsured motor coverage is going to be a consideration here. You will see when binding coverage, most carriers in this space will ask for a sign-off for the minimum allowable UIM coverage and limits in a state. That is pretty standard. And obviously, if we're talking, maybe average $500 a year per unit for the overall coverage, that is not steeply priced. And so, they want to ensure that the pricing that they're getting in is appropriate for the coverage that they're giving out. So that is not unheard of to have the sign off for the lower UIM limit. As you see on the primary auto liability, if you guys are writing that, New Jersey recently, I believe last year, passed legislation requiring $1.5 million limit. State law now in the state of New Jersey, and you will see that follow through to the NTL, where if you have an NTL policy written in New Jersey, that carrier should be giving that $1.5 million limit instead of that standard $1 million limit. And last item on this, the majority of the markets that we work with, they prefer to have class 7 and 8 tractor trailers. Obviously, what you think of when you think of a true tractor. Reason being, obviously, you think about the nature of the exposure on personal time, going to do errands, things like that. A pickup truck, a box truck, Sprinter van, a car, much higher exposure, much more likely to jump in that Sprinter van and run out to a restaurant or go do something else of a personal nature than you are with a with a class 7 or 8 tractor trailer. So just a bunch of varied information there on some of the context on what NTL is, but hopefully that's helpful in just kind of understanding where this fits in the marketplace and some of the things we're talking about. Moving on to the next slide. So looking at the coverage form, very quick breakdown of a sample coverage form. Obviously, each form is going to vary a little bit. I pulled Great Americans here. We do a good amount with them. One of the leaders in writing NTL in the industry. We've been writing it a long time. Solid form, and very simple. Item that occurs here. You see when in the coverage part of the form, it gives basic, auto liability coverage in the coverage part A. You see it laid out right there, but then that coverage part C, and then the exclusion C just takes out that business use. And then if you go on the other part of that slide, on the right-hand slide where you see A, B, C, D, E, F, those sections really put a lot of teeth into that business use exclusion and really drill down and ensure that if you are going to get the unit fixed, if you're going to pick up a trailer and then pick up a load, things like that, those are also excluded. So again, I think sometimes it's helpful to look at an actual form and see how it's laid out. And what you by and large see with non-trucking liability is an auto liability form with that business use exclusion. So next slide. Some of the common endorsements that we see. Before I get into these, and then I'm going to kick it over to Tom, and Tom will take us through the rest of the presentation. These are endorsements that broaden non-trucking liability coverage, but they are generally given to profitable larger accounts. So we don't see these given out every day. I think across our entire book, only a few accounts have them. But again, we're talking about this coverage. We just want to make you aware that these endorsements are out there in the marketplace. Language may vary by carrier. Every carrier, like anything, operates a little bit differently. But there are a few endorsements out there that do broaden this coverage and eat into that primary auto liability. Maintenance endorsement. Again, I don't want to read it verbatim for you. You can read it yourself. But one of the keywords here is regularly garaged, and obviously maintenance facility, right? So as part of that lease agreement with that motor carrier, you are required to keep the unit in shape, keep the unit operating as it should. So you are required to go in and ensure you have regular maintenance. If you are leaving a regularly garage location and going in to have that regular maintenance done, and an incident occurs, potentially, you can never say 100% yes or no, that would be covered under this maintenance endorsement. To and from, keyword here is trailer. So if you are on your way to pick up a trailer and then pick up a load, and an incident occurs, if you have this to and from endorsement, you may have coverage for that incident, whereas under an NTL policy without this endorsement, you would not have coverage. That would be primary auto. And hovering, where the hovering endorsement comes into play, we look at that where you drop off a load at 6 o'clock on Wednesday. You may have another load coming in a few hours or early the next morning. You have some time to kill. So, you're on the clock, so to speak, but not a little bit of a gray area. Ordinarily, that would not fall under NTL coverage. If you have a hovering endorsement and an incident occurs, yes, potentially, we have, again, anytime with claims, you hate to say 100% yes or no until you see specifics of an incident. But there's potential that this hovering endorsement would pick up an incident that occurs in that time frame where you're in an area waiting for your next load. So I'm going to kick it over to Tom now, and Tom is going to jump into some of the difference between bobtail, unladen, and NTL, because this is another thing that comes up a lot. Is I think some of these terms are used colloquially, and I don't think people really understand the true meaning of bobtail versus NTL. So Tom's going to take it from here.
So one of the things those endorsements are designed to really kind of help expand the non-trucking liability. A lot of times, common words that you're going to hear or your insurers are going to ask you for, that hey, that guy's bobtailing. Bobtailing is a common phrase that's been used for over 45 years inside the trucking industry, unladen as well. Those are two types of coverages that are in essence available, but they're going to be priced in such a way you're not going to be able to really be able to offer them for your insureds. So those endorsements going to non-trucking liability give you the best chance of expanding coverage on the non-trucking liability to get you as close to bobtail as possible. But realize a lot of times when people are talking bobtail, it's not readily available in the marketplace. Very few carriers have it. And if they do, they've got it priced in such a way that it is going to actually be as expensive as the primary liability in a lot of ways, because instead of being something that's going to be relatively close to $35 a month, about $270 a month. And a lot of the insurers look at it and go, oh, that's not what I'm looking for. And that's if they're willing to even write it. So kind of using some examples, and I'm going to probably cut the examples that we have down from 4 to just 2, because and you'll see the other ones in the slides when they get sent out to you, but just from a respect to your time. So if I've got Jim dropping off a load and he's supposed to get a load at another location, but he stops to get a haircut, would his trip be covered by NTL? And we're going to give you a second to just kind of let you figure out whether you like that. All right, so a lot of you have yes, and some 68% have no. Actually, it wouldn't be covered because he left while actually still in the vicinity and being under dispatch. Now, a million people are going to fight this a million different ways. It's going to end up being in the eye of the beholder. So, I would just leave it to the senses that, in general, the NTL carrier is not going to cover that. So Susie finishes up dropping her load and trailer on a Saturday, and she heads home. Her next scheduled load is on Monday. On Sunday, she heads to the store in the tractor to buy food. Would this be covered under the NTL? It would be covered. The reason why is she's no longer under dispatch. She's actually been back to her primary garage location over the weekend. Now, there's a lot of things that can be played again inside of that, but lawyers are always going to argue. It's just giving you a general concept of what the perspective the carrier is going to look at, and so that they give you an idea. We can flip through the next couple examples and just kind of from a time standpoint. We can skip through 4 as well. Let me give you some of the underwriting considerations. Key elements when you're underwriting it. We're going to need a lease agreement. Who owns the vehicles? The loss history and drivers. How large is the owner-operator population? Where is the population? As far as we're going to literally ask you for driver's name, date of birth, CDL number, full address. It's a new program. Is it an old program that we're looking to replace coverage, or is it a takeover where you need a vehicle or taking over? Just some of those things we always look at. We'll ask you for. And again, if you come to us with something, we're going to give you what you need to get the answers. We're just kind of giving you an overview of this right now. If you want to just flip to the next slide, we'll send you out the application. And again, kind of go through the same things I just went. If we want to hit to the next slide, I think we're okay because time's getting tight. So we're going to kind of give this some to you guys to hit some questions, and we're going to try and get some of those answered for you. What we don't get answered, we'll get back to you if we haven't answered it, so that we can help you if it's the question. But we just now, and again, in respect of time, we really want to keep this at a 30-minute limit.
Got it. Yeah. So if you have any questions, send them in to the chat below, and we'll get them. We'll run through. We have a couple in that I'll run through quickly. So one other note, again, we had 4 claim examples on there, very rough, just to give you an idea of think some of these things through, how the coverage works, how it responds to different situations. Obviously, again, it's always in the specifics.
So Jim, there's one I just saw that just came across about campers and RVs, and why are they asking for unladen? Well, they're going to ask for unladen because it's going to give them the broadest coverage. It's actually going to be virtually primary liability. But the carrier isn't going to. What they're trying to do is offset all of their liability from a primary standpoint and put it onto the unladen. Again, unladen was very popular in the early 90s. Everybody started writing it, and what happened? They got their heads handed to them from a loss standpoint, because you're virtually taking a primary position on something. So people moving the carriers and the campers, they absolutely want that because they're just trying to offload their primary risk and put it onto the owner operator. That's probably the quickest way I can give that answer.
Yep. Yeah, and we'll follow up on that. Just again, I would, we got a question in about bobtail. I would, do we see it in the marketplace? Is it frequent? There are a couple people writing bobtail. Most people writing NTL, and I think this goes with the unladen question. I would just make sure that if you are writing NTL with an insured, that you've articulated with them and defined with them that they have NTL and they don't have bobtail and or unladen, just to make sure that everyone's crystal clear in writing that that they don't have the bobtail exposure, which is, as Tom laid out a few slides ago, is different than the NTL exposure. We get a lot of people asking for a bobtail, and I think they mean NTL. Again, just got to make sure everyone's clear on that.
There's a question here about so our radius is unlimited. I mean, we've got customers that are intermodal and where they're going to go 50 miles to 75 miles outside of the ports. To we've got customers that will have their guys running from from South Florida to Washington State. We can handle it all. That's not the radius. So if you've got something that anything between, we'll look at. And again, what we would tell you is give us an opportunity to say no. We're going to not try and say no, and we're going to try and help you and your insured get the right coverage, put it in the right place, and make sure that when you're presenting it, you've got everything in your hands, all the tools for you to be successful in writing that account. But looking at the time, we're going to probably wrap this up, and we're going to get back. We've got several questions, but looking at it's 2:28, I don't think there's enough time for us to answer them. But most importantly, we want to say thank you guys to taking out of your busy day and busy schedule to hear what we had to say on this. And hopefully, we've given you just a snippet of what helps you, along the way. And again, we ask you, feel free to reach out to Jim or myself. Again, we've been doing this for a long time, and we're accustomed to off-the-wall questions and handling them. And actually, your insured probably has legitimate concerns about making sure, because every company is really trying to go asset light right now, where they don't own their vehicles because the cost of owning a vehicle, between finance, between maintenance, and when there's an accident, it's a total loss. So they're trying to divest out of taking their own vehicles and bring it into owner operators, and that's where we're to help. We can help them make them asset light if they need to. So we'd love to help you if there's that possibility, and thank you again for your time.
Yeah, I think we're gonna flash up one poll again. Thanks for your time. Reach out anytime. We'll be back quickly, but hopefully this provided some value. Yeah, so just answer that. If you'd like us to reach out to you just to discuss further. Other than that, please again, thanks for your time and best of luck with everything. Hopefully everyone has a great holiday season.